Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. My name is Abria Turner. I am currently reading through the Old Testament in a year, and today we will be flipping through and overviewing the book of Joshua. So let's get right into it. Okay, so here is my Bible, my English Standard Version Bible, and as you can tell, I do highlight and take notes in my Bible. So as we flip through, we're going to be seeing a little bit of that as I'm explaining my notes and just going into detail, giving us a better understanding of the word and talking to you about what it is that I learned as I was reading. So here we are in the book of Joshua. This is chapter 1, and it starts off with God's commission to Joshua. A verse that a lot of us are familiar with is Joshua 1:9. It says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Something that stood out to me after having read Deuteronomy is that this is not the first time where we hear of his commission. We actually hear about Joshua's commission in Deuteronomy chapter 31. So here we are in Deuteronomy chapter 31. And around the 7th verse is when Joshua receives his commission. And at this time, this is when Moses is talking to Joshua in the sight of all Israel, saying, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed." And so this commission was given by Moses to Joshua, as I said. Similar words were also given to the entire congregation of Israel, as we can see in verse 6, to be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them. For it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. And so this promise of God being with them and not forsaking them wasn't just for Joshua, but it was also for the entire congregation. And I love how this commission is repeated again toward the end of Deuteronomy 31. In the 23rd verse, the Lord commissioned Joshua, the son of Nun, and said, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall bring the people of Israel into the land that I swore to give them. I will be with you." And so obviously we see that there's this repetition of Joshua's commission to be strong and courageous, not to be afraid, for God is with him and he will not leave him. So if we go back to Joshua chapter 1, where we see it again, we understand why it says, "Have I not commanded you?" Because the Lord has already given him this command and given him this commission before now. So here it is a reminder. When it comes to Joshua being the one who's going to lead the children of Israel into the promise, similarly how Moses was the one who led the children of Israel out of bondage and out of Egypt, God was going to be with him. And he had to be confident that God was with him. Having this courage and having this strength was so important because he was going to be faced with some challenges. He was going to be leading this people who had become accustomed to being led by Moses. Since they left Egypt, they were used to being led by Moses. A whole generation had passed away. The new generation is here that's entering into the promised land. But up until this point, it has always been Moses. And so when you kind of think about people, sometimes people would say, "So why should I trust you? How can I really trust you? How can I stand behind you?" Or even just from Joshua's standpoint of, now I'm being the one who is called to lead this people, understanding how big of an ask that is. This is not a calling from God that he can run away from, that he can hide away from. He must stand strong in what God is telling him to do. But what enables him to be able to do it is that God is with him. And so he has to just remain strong and courageous, standing on the promises of God, that promise being that he is with him, that God is going before them, that God is going to clear out these nations, and that he can lead. So even today, let us stand strong in knowing that when it comes to whatever God has called or commissioned us to do, we can do it and we must do it. God is with us to help us get it done. And so if we move up just a tad bit, around the 5th verse, he says, "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous." We see that repetition again. "For you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go." So that is the promise. That is his mission. This is what God is charging him to do. And as he was with Moses, he will be with Joshua. As we were reading the book of Deuteronomy, we were emphasizing the importance of obeying God. And Moses was encouraging the children of Israel to be an obedient people. And because they are God's people who are set apart from these other nations, there's a certain way that God wants them to live. So their obedience is important for them to reflect that difference in the earth, reflect that they have a love and a fear of the only God, our Lord, who is in heaven. All the other idols that these other nations were worshiping and even later would be worshiping, they were called to be set apart from them. So obedience is key. And God had given them the law, which we talked about in Leviticus, which we saw glimmers of even in Deuteronomy. And so the Lord tells him in verse 8, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success." His success, his prosperity was dependent upon his obedience. His ability to lead well had to do with his obedience to God, his obedience to the law of God. So I love how it says that the book of the law shall not depart from his mouth, but he shall meditate on it and do it. And I love how when it comes to meditating on the word, it wasn't just something that he would do in his mind, but also what he would speak out of his mouth. The words that God had given them, the laws, these promises, needed to be not just meditated on in the mind, but also constantly coming out of his mouth. And so we also not just think the word, not just read the word, but also begin to proclaim the word, speak the words to ourselves. That is true meditation. And he was to do it day and night. So now that Joshua has received his commission, he is getting ready to lead these people into the promised land. So he's getting them ready. And I love how he told them, speaking to the officers of the people, to pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, "Prepare your provisions, for within 3 days you are to pass over this Jordan and to go in and take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess." And I wrote, get ready. Get ready, get ready, get ready. So it goes on to talk about how the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh came to Joshua. And it's very important to note that these 3 tribes, or 2.5 tribes rather, Moses had already given them land that they were going to dwell in that was on this side of the Jordan. So once they cross over and they truly enter into the land of Canaan, their land, their inheritance wouldn't be among their brothers because they had already chosen their land to remain on the opposite side. They just had to go out and fight all the battles with their brothers. And it wasn't until all those battles were done that they could come back home. So these 2.5 tribes, they come to Joshua, and Joshua is actually talking to them. And Joshua is telling them to remember the word that Moses had told them, that it was the Lord who was providing them a place of rest and will give them this land. But they had to be obedient and go ahead and fight these battles. And the men agree. They say that they're going to do it, that they're going to go. And just as they obeyed Moses in all things, so will we obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. And they said, whoever rebels against your commandment and disobeys your words, whatever you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So I took a note here about how I love how the people are reminding Joshua of God's commission, and they even blessed him. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses, which was in accordance with the promise of God that the Lord had already made. So now we can move into chapter 2 as they are preparing to actually enter into the promised land. First, they sent out spies. And we know in Numbers chapter 13, Moses has sent spies out into the promised land for them to check it out. They were supposed to bring back some fruit. They were supposed to be of good courage and to bring back a report. And they brought back a report to the entire camp of Israel, and only Caleb brought back a good report, and everyone else had a negative report saying that they weren't going to be able to fight against these people. They were too tall, they were too mighty, they had fortified cities, they had all of these things, and they didn't have the faith that they were going to be able to fight against them or live in this land like the Lord had promised. So that is one of the reasons why the older generation, they had to pass away, and the Lord allowed a new generation to come up in the wilderness over the course of 40 years so that new generation can enter into the promised land. So Joshua does things a little bit differently here in this scenario. As he's preparing to send out these spies, for one, he only sends out 2 spies. For 2, these 2 spies, when they came back to their report, they didn't report back to the entire camp of Israel, but they reported only to Joshua. Now let's read just a little bit about where they were going and what happened on their journey. So as I said, Joshua, he sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. So when the king found out that these 2 men had come into the land of Jericho, there were other others who were sent out to go and find them. Rahab, the woman, she took the 2 men and she hid them. And then when she went up to where they were after the men had already gone on, she said, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you, for we have heard. And I love this testimony because it reveals that these other nations and these other people, they know about the Lord God Almighty. They know who he is and what he's done already for the children of Israel and what he's already done to other nations as they encountered them. So these people in Jericho, they were already afraid because of what God had already done and helped them to do. Here we see Rahab's faith in that she talks about the Lord your God. He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. And she wanted a sign. She wanted to be saved from the destruction that she knew was going to come to their city. And the sign was the scarlet cord that she was going to tie in the window so that these spies, that they wouldn't come and let her or her family die when they were actually going to come into Jericho and conquer that land. In Hebrews 11, Rahab is esteemed for how she hid these spies. She could have been like the other men and she could have given them away. She could have said, oh, this is where they are, this is where they went, but she took them in. You know, if the king would have found out that she took them in, you know, she could have been in trouble for that. So we see where she exemplified faith and courage in keeping the spies and keeping them safe, and also in how she knew the Lord, and she took a chance even in asking the spies to spare her life, and they chose to do that. And her and her family, they stayed in that house as we transition into what happened next. So when the spies came back after 3 days, they spoke directly to Joshua and told him everything that had happened to them. And they said, truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. And so they had faith. They came back with a good report of faith that the Lord was going to do what he promised. And he went ahead and told them that the other people, they feared them. So now Israel can prepare to actually cross over the Jordan. And Joshua tells them to consecrate themselves, to set themselves apart, to take time to fast, because tomorrow the Lord was going to do wonders among them. And God said, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. So here in Joshua chapter 3, the Lord parts the waters again and allows for the children of Israel to cross on dry land. In the middle of the Jordan, because of how the waters flowed, there were smooth stones in that water. And so the Lord told them to get 12 stones. And with these stones, they stacked them up as a memorial later, which we can read about in chapter 4. But they stacked them up for a memorial for them to be able to remember what the Lord had done for them and how they crossed over on dry land. And as well as in the middle of the Jordan, they left a stack of 12 stones to represent the 12 tribes of Israel. The people had crossed over on dry land again. So now what happened when they actually have crossed over the Jordan and they're preparing to enter into the land of Jericho? First and foremost, the new generation was circumcised. In Genesis 17, we read about the importance of circumcision. It was a sign of the covenant that God had made with Abraham, and part of that had to do with how his descendants would enter into the promised land. But all of his male descendants, they had to be circumcised. Any male who wasn't circumcised, then they had broken God's covenant, and so they couldn't remain a part of his people. So because this new generation, they had been coming up in the wilderness, many of them had not been circumcised. They were circumcised before they could continue to go into this promised land and do what happened next. After celebrating the first Passover in Canaan, we move into chapter 6, where it is the fall of Jericho. So the spies were sent specifically into Jericho, but Jericho had fortified walls. They had walls around the city. And so how are they going to get in? This is where the Lord did another wonderful act. The Lord had told Joshua to command the people to walk around the walls of Jericho, the city, 1 time a day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they were to walk around 7 times. And each time they walked around, they were supposed to be quiet. And after that last time, the priests who were carrying these ram's horns, they were going to lift up a loud shout, and then the people were going to shout. And as all of this noise was going, the walls of Jericho were going to fall. And the walls of Jericho did just that, and they fell flat for the people to be able to go into the city and conquer the city. And this is when Rahab and her family were saved, as they had the sign out of the window, the scarlet cord, and so they were able to be saved in the midst of the city being conquered. In chapter 7, we're introduced to Israel's sin. It starts off by saying, but the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things. For Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things, and the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel. In chapter 6, they had been commanded to devote everything to destruction. It says, and the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. If you read on in verse 18, it says, but you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make of the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. And so this is what the Lord commanded them to do. And if we go here into chapter 7, somebody didn't listen. And so Joshua wasn't aware of this at the time, that someone had took the devoted things. So when he sent out men to go and fight, it says about 3,000 men went up. And the men of who I'm going to call Ai killed about 36 of their men and chased them before the gate as far as Shebarim and struck them at the descent, and the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Even Joshua, he tore his clothes, he's fallen to the earth, he's talking to the Lord. He's saying, Lord, why have you brought this people over the Jordan to give us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. Oh Lord, what can I say when Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? So Joshua is completely distraught. He doesn't know who else to blame besides the Lord in this moment. In his words, when he's talking about would it have been better if we stayed over the Jordan, that began to remind me though of when the children of Israel were saying, oh, would it have been better if we had been in Egypt? So I was kind of worried for Joshua and how the Lord was about to respond, but the Lord just responded by telling him to get up and telling him that somebody had sinned. And so that is what needed to be addressed. So ultimately, they went to go on a search for who was the one who broke faith and had kept these devoted things. And once they found out exactly who it was, he did confess that he had sinned. And his consequence of his sin was that he was stoned with stones, and they burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. So now they're able to go back into battle, okay? They dealt with the sin, they dealt with the wrongdoing. Now they can go into battle and have victory. So now they're fighting against who I'm going to call Ai again. And so the Lord said to them, do not fear and do not be dismayed. And I believe that this was a reminder of his commission, how he was supposed to be of good courage. He was supposed to be strong and not be afraid. The Lord was with him. So God tells him, do not be afraid and do not be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you and arise and go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city and his land. So they go up. The Lord had also given them specific instructions on how to fight this battle. And as they followed them, they were able to obtain the victory that the Lord had prepared for them. So after that battle, Joshua had built an altar unto the Lord. And there, in the presence of all the people, which was very, very important that I wanted to know, in the presence of all the people, he wrote on the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he had written. And let's jump down. Afterwards, when he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law, there was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, and the women and the little ones and the sojourners who lived among them. Everyone heard the word. And I believe that the author of Joshua really is emphasizing how at this point, Joshua has written all the word. They're all seeing it. They're all being read the word. Everyone is aware of what Moses said, word for word. Not just what Moses had already told them in Deuteronomy. Every word from the book of the law, they were being told. And think back to chapter 1, when we were talking about his commission. The Lord told him that the book of the law shall not depart from his mouth, that he shall meditate on it day and night, and that he should be careful to do it. So he's even reminding the people of how they are to be obedient, what they're supposed to obey, how they're supposed to be faithful. Everything that's written to the law. Everybody heard it. So just as much as he emphasized it, I want to emphasize in this video so we will understand the importance of some of the stuff that's about to happen next. In chapter 9, I have this section heading that says the Gibeonite deception. And so here in this chapter, the inhabitants of Gibeon, they heard what Joshua had done to Jericho, and essentially they didn't want it to happen to them. So they dressed up, made themselves to look poor so they didn't look like who they really were. They came to Joshua in the camp of Gilgal, saying that they were from a distant country, as though they weren't one of the Canaanites. They were asking to be their servants and to make a covenant with us. And in verse 14, it says, so the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them and let them live. And the leaders of the congregation swore to them. A part of what they were not supposed to do, which is written in the law, which was repeated many, many times, was that they were not supposed to make a covenant with these people, including marriage. So here, right after they have read the law, they're aware of this. They made a covenant. And it emphasizes they didn't ask counsel from the Lord about what to do. And so something that I took away from this to apply to my life is that when I get into a situation that seems sketchy, because like I said, they did deceive them. So when they did, recognize who they were, they had to keep their covenant, but they recognized that they had sinned against the Lord. What I took away from this is that, okay, when I'm faced with something that I'm not sure how to deal with, even if it looks like something that I think I can do, always ask for God's counsel. Because when men are being deceptive, God can give wisdom. God will open up our eyes for us to be able to see. God will remind us of his covenant and help us to be obedient to what he's told us to do. But we have to be proactive in seeking his counsel and intentional about obeying his command. So that's what happened in chapter 9. And in chapter 10, they were in a battle again. And King of Jerusalem, Adonizedek, he heard that the children of Israel had already captured Jericho and that the Gibeonites had made a covenant. Now he's getting all these kings together and their men of war to fight against the people of Israel. So it was the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. So the men of Gibeon, they asked Joshua to come up to help us. The Lord tells him again, not to fear, for I have given them into your hand, not a man of them shall stand before you. So they're going into battle. And in verse 12, it says, at that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ahijalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. I just love how he spoke to the sun, to the moon, and told them to be still. And that allowed for them to be able to fight that battle, get the victory that the Lord had planned for them. And also how it was Joshua. Yes, he was the one who God had chose to lead the people of Israel, but also he was just a man. Like he was a natural man who spoke to the sun and spoke to the moon for it to be still, and it listened. And so ultimately we know that God is in control of things, but I love how even God honored that and let the sun and the moon stand still. I'm also reminded of how in the book of Genesis, where it talks about how man and woman were given dominion over the earth to subdue it. And so I feel like that was a demonstration of the power and the dominion that God had given man to rule over the earth, in that he spoke to the sun and the moon for it to be still, for what they needed to happen on the earth to be able to come into fruition. So I just love that. And the 5 kings, those 5 Amorite kings, they were executed. And it goes into the rest of their conquest of southern Canaan in Joshua chapter 10. And then in Joshua chapter 11, we go into the conquest of northern Canaan. And what I'm going to do now, since I'm noticing that as I was probably reading through Joshua at this time, I may not have had a lot of time to highlight and to take notes in every chapter. So as I'm noticing some of this repetition about the Lord telling him not to be afraid, I'm actually going to go ahead and highlight that in blue while we're reading, just to, for one, also give y'all some clarity in the video, and to just be realistic with y'all. Sometimes you don't have time to highlight and all of that, but as long as you understand the word and you're reading it, that's what matters. The Lord has said, do not fear them here in chapter 10. I see it again here in chapter 11. Do not be afraid of them. And as I flip the page here to see more of chapter 11, I love how now that they have conquered this land, and it says there was none of the Anakim left in the land of the people of Israel, It says in the land of the people of Israel. Like, this isn't the land of the Canaanites. This isn't the land of Canaan. This is the land of the people of Israel. So I love that little touch that the author put in there, because it's like, oh, okay, now we know, like, this is their land. And it just emphasize that importance, that like they're actually conquering this land and that they're obtaining the promise that the Lord has given them. So I love that. That's why I circled that. And it says, and the land had rest from war. In chapter 12, it goes over the kings who were defeated by Moses. I know in Numbers, it talked about battles that Moses was involved in. And so here in Joshua chapter 12, we're reminded of the battles that Moses fought in and where he had victory. And then around verse 7 through the end of chapter 12, we're given this list of the kings that Joshua defeated. And in chapter 13, it starts off by letting us know Joshua was old and advanced in years. And essentially there was land that still needed to be conquered, but the Lord reminded that I myself will drive them out from before the people of Israel. So these lands that they still have to go out and conquer, the Lord is saying, you know, I'm still going to drive them out. That is still my promise. I'm going to be faithful to my promise. So this is when they're going through giving everybody their inheritance. Starting in chapter 13, 2.5 of the tribes, they already had their land, which was on the other side of the Jordan. That was going to be theirs. The rest of the land of Canaan still needed to be divided for who was going to get what, which cities were the cities of refuge, which cities were going to go to the Levites. And it really is interesting. So this is the moment where I wish I had a map. And once I actually do, give me a little map, give me a little atlas, if I'm able to find one that shows this, y'all, this is where those Bible study tools can come in handy. So if you have that, like, this is a good time to like pull that out so you can see where everybody was. So whenever I want to come back and I want to look a little deeper, these are different things that I can pay attention to. So this is when they're going through giving everybody their inheritance, starting in chapter 13 all the way into chapter 19. It's all about where each tribe would be. We even see some other inheritance given. So specifically, there was an inheritance for Joshua that he had. We even read about an inheritance that Caleb had. Caleb was one of the spies who went out with Moses the first time, came back with that good report. And remember what we talked about in Numbers, it was only Joshua and Caleb from the previous generation who was going to be able to enter into the promised land. So Caleb also had specific land that was for him. So once we move into chapter 20, we find out which 6 cities were going to be their cities of refuge. So I went ahead and circled the names of all of those cities here. And remember, the cities of refuge were for when someone killed a man accidentally. But if someone tried to come after him for killing their loved one or killing somebody they knew, or was just trying to come and attack their life, they were able to stay in the city of refuge to be protected from anyone who was coming after them. That was their safe place, and they couldn't leave that city or else they wouldn't be protected, and it would be fine if like somebody came and killed them. That's all in the law. So then specific land was also given to the Levites, certain cities along with their pasture lands. This was going to be their inheritance. So essentially the Levites didn't get their own like portion of the land, but from each of the tribes, they were given portions from each of the tribes to form their land, including the pasture lands. So that's what's going on. So that's another reason why we read about how all the tribes were given their land, all the people were given their land. There were certain cities of refuge, but then here we go. This is what the Levites got according to their promise and what the Lord had instructed for them to receive. And here I highlighted, in all, they received 48 cities with their pasture lands. In verse 43, it says, "Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give their fathers, and they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hand. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass." Y'all, our God is a promise keeper, and he's always been a promise keeper. I want to remind you that this promise of the land of Canaan, we read about in Genesis. This happened with Abraham, where God promised Abraham and made a covenant with Abraham that his descendants were going to inherit the land of Canaan. And now they have received that promise. All these books and all these chapters that we've read so far were really leading us up until this point where they are able to have the promise that God had blessed them with. And not only did they receive the promise, they received rest. And they had also received that assurance that, wow, across all of these hundreds of years, our God is still a promise keeper. For me, that builds my faith. For us, we should let it build our faith. We're going to read about the children of Israel and how they began to go left and start worshiping false gods in later books and all of that. But for us, that can be an encouragement that our God is a promise keeper. He is faithful to his word. So whatever the Lord has promised you, it's specifically whatever he's promised in his word, it is true. Let it be true, and continue to wait in hopeful expectation for what it is that the Lord has promised and prepared for you. In chapter 22, these are when the 2.5 tribes, here written as the eastern tribes, were able to return home. Joshua got them all together. He said, "You have kept all that Moses, servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. Therefore turn and go to your tents in the land where your possessions lie. Only be very careful to observe the commandment." The specific commandment that Joshua wanted them to follow was to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and to cling to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. But as I was reading that, it reminded me of what Jesus said in Matthew 22:40, where he said that on these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. In verse 37, it said, "And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." So even though he's telling them to obey everything that God had commanded, that summary of this specific command aligns with the rest of the laws that were written. So right before they went home, they decided to make an altar as a sign that, we are also one with the children of Israel. We just live on the other side of the tracks. We are faithful to God. And by tracks, I mean the Jordan. And let's look at that. They go and make this huge altar, an altar of imposing size. And so when the people of Israel heard it, they was like, "I know y'all ain't out here making idols already." They're like, "Wait a minute. We need to confront y'all. We need to find out what's going on." And so, the people of Israel, they come to them and they're like, "Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord. What is this breach of faith that you have committed against the God of Israel in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar this day in rebellion against the Lord? Have we not had enough of the sin of Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which there came a plague upon the congregation of the Lord, that you too must turn away this day from following the Lord?" They are like, "What is going on? Like, we don't need this right now. Like, we just got the land. We just conquered this, baby. We already dealing with this that we still need to be cleansed from. What are you doing?" So this is their defense. They're about to tell them why they're building this altar. So they responded in verse 22 of chapter 22. "The mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows, and let Israel itself know. If it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today for building an altar to turn away from following the Lord. Or if we did so, to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it. May the Lord himself take vengeance. No, but we did it from fear that in time to come your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you, you people of Reuben and people of Gad. You have no portion in the Lord. So your children may make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore, we have said, let us now build an altar, not for burning offering, nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence. So that altar stood as a witness between the people of Israel and the 2.5 tribes that remained on the other side of the Jordan, that the Lord is God. And so they were concerned about the next generation trying to divide themselves and be all like, the Lord put this natural border. You ain't a part of us. You ain't a part of our inheritance. As I said, this was a sign for them to know, baby, we of the same bloodline. Now we have made it to chapter 23. Joshua summoned all Israel, its elders and heads, its judges and officers, and he's talking to them. He's old. He had given them their inheritance, and the Lord was going to continue to fight for them to drive out the rest that were left, that they shall possess the land, just as the Lord their God had promised them. Verse 6, therefore be very strong to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand or to the left, that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mention of the name of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them, but you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. So we also receive this sign that they have clung to the Lord their God. They have depended on the Lord their God up until this point. They have learned to be faithful. They know without a shadow of a doubt who God is, who's been the one fighting for them, who has given them this blessing. Be faithful to him, be faithful to the law. But if they were to turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations remaining among them and make marriages with them, come on, don't marry the Canaanites, so that you associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they will become a snare and a trap for you, a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good ground that the Lord your God has given you. Right there, we see the clear consequence of what's going to happen if they don't be faithful to God, if they begin to intermingle with these Canaanites who are still there. Remember, the Lord had promised that he was going to drive out the rest of these Canaanites. They still had land to conquer, but they could do it. Here we see that reminder again, that everything that the Lord God had promised concerning you, all have come to pass for you. Not one of them has failed. But in verse 15 it says, but just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things. So just as much as they would want to cling to the good promises of God, those negative consequences that he said was going to happen if they be disobedient, they were going to come to pass. They didn't just need to cling to the good promises. They needed to remember the consequences of their sin if they go that route, what it was going to be. God's not partial. What he says it's going to be, so shall it be. The good, the bad, the ugly. So in Joshua 24, he gathered all the tribes of Israel together, and the Lord began to speak to them. And here, all of this is the Lord reminding Israel of his mighty works and his faithfulness. How he brought them out of Egypt, how he parted the Red Sea, how he was faithful to them in the wilderness. Even now, how he has given them this land. He says, it was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and cities that you had not built, and you dwell in them. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards that you did not plant. So now, at the end of chapter 24, after the Lord has reminded them of what he's done, Joshua, he speaks to the people, and he's telling them to choose ye this day who you're going to serve. He tells them to fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Choose this day who you will serve. He's saying, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And so he gives them a choice, but the people go ahead and agree that we will serve the Lord, for he is our God. Then Joshua kind of drops some bad news. He drops some real news. He drops a little nugget for us. He says to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgressions or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after having done you good. But the people were like, no, we're going to serve the Lord. So he said, okay, you are a witness against yourselves today that you have chosen the Lord. And I love how he dropped that nugget, because now Joshua is ending in a similar manner to what Deuteronomy ended, because Deuteronomy ended with God telling Moses that the people were going to be disobedient. He had him write a whole song about it in Deuteronomy 32. So even now, in this short little paragraph, Joshua reminds them in these few sentences that you're not going to be faithful. And the Lord's going to bring this disaster upon you because of your disobedience. But they swear, they're like, no, we're going to be faithful. So we end this book with the renewal of the covenant. Joshua writes these words in the book of the law, and Joshua dies. Not only does Joshua die, but the elders who also have seen and witnessed the good things that God has done, they know without a shadow of a doubt that it's been God. They're also up in age as well, and eventually they die. But it says Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua. we see their faithfulness. They are actually holding on to what they said they were going to do. They got the bones of Joseph and they went ahead and buried him too. And they buried some other people. And let me specify why I said the elders also died. I said that because it says Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel. So essentially it's saying that Israel was faithful the same time that Joshua was here up until his death, and all while the elders lived. So what I'm trying to emphasize is that, okay, Israel was faithful all of that time, but now we're kind of sitting here with a big old question mark. And this is how we're going to end this overview. Who is going to lead the people of Israel? We know they have all of these other leaders, but will there be someone who leads in that big capacity like Moses or Joshua? Is there going to be someone who succeeds Joshua? Who's going to be the main person or the main group of people who now leads Israel now that they're in the promised land? But that concludes the overview for the book of Joshua. I hope you learned something. I think every time that I give an overview of a book of the Bible, I learn even more or notice new things that I may not have noticed when I initially read. And that's the importance of repetition, reading over and over again and just being exposed to the word more than one time, because we can begin to see new things, learn new things, grasp new things, and there's always room to come back. So this concludes the overview for Joshua. If you like this video, make sure to check out the other ones like it, as I am doing an overview of every book of the Old Testament as I finish reading them. So that link will be in the description. Go ahead while you're down there, like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this one. And I love y'all, and y'all have a blessed day in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.